Russia's invasion of Ukraine is expected to be a primary issue tonight during President Biden's first State of the Union address. Along with the war, the president is also expected to talk about the U.S. economy, inflation, and, of course, the pandemic. Joining us now here on CBS News Boston is Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey. And, Senator, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
No, great to be with you. Thank you.
Well, a majority of Americans support U.S. action so far in response to Russia. There are some who are also concerned, they tell us in a CBS News poll, about the possibility of a wider war. What are you hoping to hear from the president tonight?
Well, my hope is that the president delivers a message of unity that our country has, Democrat and Republican, to support Ukraine against this unwarranted invasion by Putin and Russia of Ukraine. And that we can come together as one nation, sending that message to the world, because obviously the president has done an excellent job in uniting all of our allies in an unprecedented way to isolate Russia. So we just have to continue to do that and send that message of unity to Russia so that they know that we are not going to go away, and to the Iranian people so that they have hope that there will be help, which is coming to their country in order to support their effort to repel the Russian invasion of their country.
Americans are clearly extremely upset by the images that they are seeing now from the more aggressive bombing campaign in Ukraine, but also that Vladimir Putin decided to put his nuclear forces on alert, as he said, that he invoked that term. What do you hope that the president can say that will comfort Americans who really worry about the possibility of Vladimir Putin mentioning his nuclear forces?
Well, obviously, it is a concerning moment when Putin announced that he had placed his nuclear forces on alert. That is unconscionable. But the reality is that the consequences for Russia would be catastrophic if they ever did use nuclear weapons. So I think ultimately this comes down to a conventional war, and that's why it is critical for the United States and for the European Union to continue to put together all of the resources that we can supply to the Ukrainians so that they can fight this war against the Russians on the ground in Ukraine.
Yeah. The mere mention of that has certainly forced NATO nations to come together on this issue. And one thing that really does affect so many NATO countries, in 2021, the Russian Federation became the second largest exporter of crude oil to the U.S., as well as to other countries. But here, tell us about your proposed legislation, which would stop Russian oil imports here.
Well, what my legislation will do is to call for a cutoff of oil from Russia to the United States. In 2021, the United States purchased $20 billion worth of Russian oil. That has to end. And instead, at least for the near term, we use the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that we have with 600 million barrels of oil to substitute for that imported oil from Russia. And then over the long term, to deploy all electric vehicles in our country. Once we deploy 15 million all electric vehicles, we have backed out all of the oil that we import from Russia on a daily basis. So we need a short-term plan to deploy the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and a longer-term plan to ensure that we deploy tens of millions of all-electric vehicles, and that will back out the oil, not just from Russia, but other parts of the world that we have become too dependent upon in terms of the importation of their oil.
Well, this seems to be the argument right now, doesn't it, between the short-term and the long-term plans here. Russia's economy is based on oil and natural gas exports, and many on the other side of the aisle say that this is the time to begin producing more oil and natural gas again in the U.S., and that would remove Russia's power all over the world, not only the U.S., but also from creating the kind of situation that Germany is in, where they're so dependent on Russia. So what's your argument? Even Senator Joe Manchin of your own party has mentioned drilling more in the short term until more renewable energies are available at some point in the future. What's your argument against that happening right now?
Well, this year, on a daily basis, the United States is exporting 7 million barrels of oil a day. The reason that we do that is that the American Petroleum Institute wants to export the 7 million barrels of oil a day, and that necessitates us importing a 500,000 barrels of oil a day from Russia. So right now, the United States is under the grip of the American Petroleum Institute, of ExxonMobil, of Chevron, who have taken control of our energy agenda. And the best way to deal with this issue is just to go back and revisit immediately this whole policy of exporting American oil. That's what makes us vulnerable. Right. And that's what was wrong in 2015 when the Republicans led the effort to repeal the ban on the exportation of oil in the United States.
Americans have been watching gas prices go up. Inflation is a concern. That CBS News poll that we have out today shows 62% of Americans disapprove of President Biden's handling of the economy. What do you think he can say or do to change some of those minds tonight?
Well, first, he can talk about what he's done in his first year, which is to pass the American Rescue Plan, to pass a bipartisan infrastructure law, which is going to lead to the creation of millions of new jobs. $9 billion is going to Massachusetts for new infrastructure projects, that he has led the effort to vaccinate over 200 million Americans, which has helped to put our economy back to work. And the president is going to further advocate for his Build Back Better plan, which will further invest in our economy, create new jobs, and ultimately bring down the cost of inflation on our economy.
And two final questions about Massachusetts. Obviously, the president will talk about that infrastructure bill. What should people in the Commonwealth be listening for that will affect Massachusetts?
Well, first, the president will be saying to Ukrainian Americans in Massachusetts that we have the back of Ukraine and that we're going to stand solidly behind that great country. He also, I think, has to talk about climate change, but the potential that funding wind and solar and all electric vehicles and batteries, creating millions of jobs in our country, that the impact that can have on backing out all of the imported oil that we right now engage in, that comes in from Russia or from the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. It's time for us to put together a comprehensive plan, and that the president is going to work very hard to make sure that there is no price gouging by large corporations taking advantage of a short-term situation in our national economy at this time. We're
beginning to see a drop in COVID cases here in Massachusetts, which I think has a lot of people feeling very good about the situation here and around the country. What are you hoping to hear from the president about moving forward and hopefully out of this pandemic?
Well, I think it's important for us to hear a plan that we are now going to stockpile the vaccines, stockpile the testing, stockpile the therapies that will be in place if there is another COVID wave, and that will fund that right now, and that we will also spend the funding on overseas distribution of the vaccine. All three variants have come from overseas to the United States, so it's important that we spend the funding overseas to vaccinate people who are otherwise vulnerable to COVID, because if we don't, it will once again boomerang into our lives and into our economy.
We all certainly hope that will not happen again. Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
No, great to be with you.
Thank you.